Why did she walk into that field when everyone else prayed she'd turn back? The morning air at Fort Benning was heavy with dew, thick enough to cling to boots and uniforms as 58 candidates stood rigidly at attention. Their faces were masks of discipline, though each one betrayed flickers of nerves, tightened jaws, quickened breathing, restless eyes. The selection course was infamous. 3 weeks designed to strip you bare to find the marrow of who you were. No excuses, no mercy. From the corner of the formation, a name cut through the silence. Sergeant Freya. A pause followed, too long. Heads turned, subtle but sharp, searching for the outlier. From the edge of the ranks she stepped forward. Compact frame, auburn hair cut short. Her voice steady as she answered, "Present, Sergeant." And yet that limp. It was small, almost imperceptible at first glance. But to soldiers trained to notice weakness, it was a red flare in the dark. Her gait had a hitch, an asymmetry that revealed itself with each shift of weight. Whispers rippled quietly through the candidates, the kind that burrow into the back of your skull when you're the one being watched. What's she doing here? She'll never last the week. Selection's no place for the broken. Captain stood at the edge of the field, eyes hidden beneath the brim of his cap, clipboard tucked under one arm. He didn't speak, didn't react, but he noticed her. He always noticed the ones no one believed in. Master Sergeant's voice carried like gravel dragged across steel. "Welcome to selection. Over the next 3 weeks you will prove who you are, or you will be gone. By the end of today, some of you will already fail. By week's end, half of you will be cut. There are no accommodations, no exceptions. The standards are absolute." His gaze landed on Freya, just long enough for her to feel it. And just like that, the games began. The first test was simple in name, brutal in practice, a 5-mile run. The group took off down the red clay trail, boots pounding against packed earth, breath fogging in the morning chill. The strongest surged forward, bodies fluid, shoulders loose, legs carving long strides. The weak fell behind almost immediately. Freya, she didn't run like them. Each step betrayed the truth of her body. That left leg, stiff and reluctant, dragged her rhythm off just enough to make her pace clumsy. She looked like she was running uphill even when the ground was flat. Within minutes she had settled into the back quarter of the formation, not failing, not quitting, just behind. At the checkpoint, Staff Sergeant raised an eyebrow as she passed. "Cutting it close, Sergeant," he muttered, voice low, not unkind. Freya gave a single nod. She didn't waste her breath. Every ounce of energy went into forward motion. When she crossed the finish line, her time scraped the edge of the standard. Not exceptional, not impressive, just barely enough. She bent forward, hands on her hips, pulling slow, deliberate breaths into her lungs. While others gasped, collapsed, or bent double with cramps, she steadied herself. Her chest rose and fell like a machine that had learned to run on fumes. "Made the standard," murmured when scoffed beside him. "Barely," said. "She won't survive the week." The day stretched on with relentless precision, strength tests, tactical puzzles, marksmanship, equipment drills. Freya's performance was consistent, never failing, never excelling. Her pull-ups hit the minimum. Her shooting was solid but not remarkable. Her tactical choices sound, though unflashy. But whenever movement entered the equation, that limp betrayed her. By nightfall, the female barracks, smaller, quieter, with only 3 women among the entire class, hummed with the muffled noise of the men's bay beyond the wall. Freya sat on her bunk, folding and refolding gear with methodical care. Through the thin walls, the whispers carried. "Did you see that limp? Affirmative action scraping the barrel if they're letting the walking wounded in now. She's done by morning PT. Bet $20 she doesn't clear the first obstacle course." The laughter stung, though none of it surprised her. Freya didn't flinch. She didn't even look up from the gear she was organizing as if she hadn't heard. Later, alone, she unrolled her pant leg. A mass of scar tissue glistened faintly under the dim light. She massaged medicated cream into ridges and valleys carved by old surgeries, tracing them with the same practiced touch she had repeated hundreds of times. Each scar carried memory, pain, and the stubbornness to keep walking despite both. The next day, the obstacle course became her private arena of humiliation. Others leapt over walls, swung across ropes, and scaled barriers with strength to spare. Freya's movements were slower, deliberate, calculated. She never failed an obstacle, but she was always one of the last to finish. At the rope climb halfway up, her left leg slipped. Her grip faltered. The rope burned through her palms as she slid. Laughter erupted from below. Gravity got her. Maybe they'll let her use the ladder. Their voices rang sharp, cruel. Freya didn't respond. She readjusted, found a new technique, and climbed again. Slower, shakier. But she didn't come down until she'd touched the beam at the top. Staff Sergeant didn't smile, but his eyes lingered on her just long enough to say what he wouldn't voice aloud. She refused to quit. It became a pattern, team exercises. They left her out. Land navigation drills. She worked alone, maps spread out under dim light while others clustered together. Captain watched from a distance, unmoving. Selection wasn't just about strength. It was about resilience, about how you carried yourself when no one wanted you there. To their surprise, Freya excelled at navigation. Her routes weren't direct but efficient, conserving energy, using terrain to her advantage, slipping unseen through the woods while others fought uphill battles. When she returned with all checkpoints located, well within time, squinted at her. Military intelligence background. Freya shook her head. Combat search and rescue. It was the only detail she gave. Nights blurred with storms, rain turning to sleet, uniforms soaked, candidates shivering under poorly built shelters. Freya, quietly, built something better, adapting survival school techniques with bits of terrain and scavenged materials. When inspected her position, his lamp lingered longer than necessary. "Where'd you learn this?" "Experience," she said simply. By week's end, the class had already thinned. 58 candidates were down to 42. Most expected Freya to be gone long before. Instead, she remained. Limping, yes, but still standing. The whispers shifted, less certain now. Instructors muttered during their nightly reviews. "She won't make the crucible." "She's resourceful, better than she looks." "She's broken, nature will sort it out." Stayed silent, though his eyes narrowed when he reached her file. Pages were redacted, details missing. Combat history in Afghanistan and 3 unnamed locations. Medical records scrubbed, save for the words catastrophic femoral fracture. Something about her didn't add up. And in her bunk, Freya prepared for the crucible, the 72-hour, 72-mile endurance march that would end this course. She checked her rucksack twice, tapping her feet, balancing weight distribution. Her face calm, steady. A memory intruded unbidden. Hospital lights, a doctor's cold words. "You'll never run normally again. Military career's over. Best accept it." She blinked once, tucked the memory away, and kept preparing. At 431 candidates stood in darkness, glowing like a constellation under the pre-dawn sky. The crucible march loomed before them, 9 checkpoints across 72 miles of mountain trails. Packs weighed 80 pounds. The record, 68 hours. Captain's voice was sharp against the cold air. "Miss one checkpoint, you're done. The only reason you leave this course early is medical evacuation. Time begins now." And then they were moving. Freya slipped to the back as always, her stride uneven, her limp visible. Some smirked, betting she wouldn't make it 10 miles, but she kept moving. One step, then another, and another. The first casualty dropped at mile 8, severe cramping, medics rushing him out. At mile 15, the trail turned upward into switchbacks. The leaders began to stumble, shifting their packs, cursing under their breath. Freya's pace never changed, mechanical, relentless. At mile 18, she passed her first fallen comrade, sitting pale and trembling on a log. She handed him a purification tablet. "Electrolytes," she said softly, then moved on. By mile 22, the storm rolled in. Rain hammered the earth, turning paths into rivers of mud. Candidates staggered into checkpoint 3, gasping, soaked, defeated. Freya arrived near the middle of the pack, mud on her uniform, eyes sharp, breathing controlled. "Still holding up, Sergeant?" asked. "Moving steady, sir," she answered. She declined the rest, just refilled water, ate half a protein bar, and walked back into the storm. Watched her disappear into the dark. "She's gaining position," he murmured. Didn't reply, but for the first time his certainty wavered. And somewhere, buried under mud and scars, Freya's mind whispered the truth she never said aloud. "They thought I came here broken, but they don't know what broke me, and they don't know why I'm still here." Why was she still moving when men twice her size were dropping in the mud? The storm had turned vicious. Rain slashed sideways through the Georgia pines, wind howling like some invisible enemy bent on breaking their will. By the 30-mile mark, candidates looked less like elite soldiers and more like prisoners of war, mud-caked faces, hollowed eyes, boots squelching with each step. Checkpoint 5 glowed faintly under lanterns, a beacon of order against the chaos. Medics worked furiously inside the tent, wrapping bodies in blankets, checking core temperatures, stabilizing twisted ankles and swollen knees. Half the original group was gone. Some evacuated with injuries. Others quit, defeated by exhaustion and weather. Freya walked in soaked, her limp pronounced but her eyes sharp. She didn't collapse onto the benches like the others. She stood in line for water, filled her canteen, and chewed a ration bar with slow efficiency. Studied her from the shadows of the tent flap. Her face looked gaunt now, cheekbones sharp against pale skin, but her breathing was even, her movements measured. She was conserving fuel while others burned theirs recklessly. 10-minute rest, a medic offered. Freya shook her head, not stopping, just refueling. Then she was gone, vanishing back into the storm before anyone could protest. Captain's voice came low from behind. "She's advancing." Nodded, eyes following her fatting. "She's not the one struggling, everyone else is." By hour 30, only 12 remained on course. The storm had driven out nearly 20 in a single night. The endurance test wasn't just physical, it was mental. Cold water filled their boots, gnawed their skin raw. Hunger clawed their bellies. Sleep deprivation pressed like a weight on their eyelids. But Freya, she just kept walking. At mile 40, once loud and mocking, leaned against a tree, his breath ragged. When Freya passed, he spat, "Still think you'll make it?" She didn't answer. Silence had become her weapon. Tried to laugh it off. "She'll drop soon, just a matter of time." But even he couldn't ignore the truth. She was still there. By the 50th mile, the numbers had dwindled further. 9 candidates left. Lieutenant Mercer, tall and iron-willed, still led. Behind him, Stevens and fought for second, and staggered somewhere in the middle. And then there was Freya, 5th, climbing steadily, closing gaps no one thought she could. At checkpoint 7, stamped her card, disbelief written across his face. "You're still here." Freya looked at him, mud streaking her cheeks, eyes unwavering. "Still here," she echoed, as if it were the simplest fact in the world. When night fell again, the storm refused to relent. The trail became a living nightmare, routes slick, slopes treacherous, fog rolling in to choke out visibility. One by one, flickered in the distance, only to vanish as bodies quit, collapsed, or were carried out. The medical tent filled with broken men. One had hypothermia, lips blue. Another sobbed quietly as medics cut his boots off swollen feet. And still she moved. Checked his chart and froze. "Captain's 5th, correction 4th, she's climbing." Didn't answer, his jaw tightened. By the 60-hour mark, dawn broke gray and reluctant. 9 had become 6. Mercer still led, but his strides faltered. was gone, pulled at mile 54 with a fractured ankle. Stevens limped, his knees swollen like grapefruit. His face was pale as chalk. And then Freya. At checkpoint 8, expected to see Mercer stride in first as always. Instead, two appeared together. Mercer stumbling, and right behind him that uneven, unrelenting stride. "Sergeant," said under his breath, unable to hide his shock. Mercer turned, staring as if she were a ghost. "You," he coughed, spitting mud. "How the hell are you still moving?" Freya didn't reply. She simply handed her card to. Mud streaked her face, her lips cracked from cold, her uniform soaked through. And yet her eyes were alive. Leaned in as he stamped her card. "Where were you deployed before this?" Freya refilled her canteen. "All over, mostly classified." "Combat search and rescue," pressed. She gave a slight nod, something like that. Something clicked in his mind, a fragment of memory half buried by years. A mission report, a helicopter extraction that had gone wrong, a rescue that sounded impossible. His gut twisted. But before he could ask more, she was gone again, trailing Mercer, gaining ground. The last stretch was cruel by design. Switchbacks clawing up nearly 2,000 feet before dropping steep into the finish. Even the strongest candidates reached their breaking points here. Mercer staggered, his will pushing him forward even as his body betrayed him. But when he paused on a steep incline, his knees buckled. His tall frame collapsed onto the trail, face pale, lips dry. Severe dehydration. Freya knelt beside him, hands steady. "Medic's coming," she said, tilting his head to open his airway, shifting him into recovery position. Mercer's eyes flickered, confused. "How are you still moving?" She didn't answer. Her silence was louder than words. Arrived moments later with medics. "We've got him," he told her. "Keep going." Freya rose, her limp more pronounced now, blood staining her pant leg from a fresh gash. "Hold up," barked. "That needs treatment." "I'll manage." The medic was already cutting away fabric, and what he revealed silenced the trail. Not just the fresh wound, but scars. Endless, jagged scars running down her thigh. Metal pins beneath the skin. Tissue grafts. A leg that should have ended her career long ago. The medic froze. Eyes widened. Recognition flashed. "Wait," he breathed. "Those scars, were you at Firebase 3 years ago?" Freya's expression faltered just for a heartbeat, her voice quiet, steady. "That's classified." But already knew. Memories surged, gunfire, explosions, chaos. A helicopter that came when no one else would. A compact figure dragging wounded through the dust. A voice steady even in the madness. His chest tightened. It was her. Before he could say more, the medic finished, bandaging the wound. "You're cleared to continue." Freya adjusted her rucksack, nodded once, and vanished back into the trail. Keyed his radio, voice tight. "Captain, I think I know who really is." The reply crackled back. "So do I. Just got her file. Get to the finish line. You're going to want to see this." 3 years earlier. Firebase, Afghanistan. His memory unspooled like film, burned at the edges. A remote outpost, never meant to be permanent, suddenly swarmed by an ambush too coordinated to be chance. Explosions ripped through their defenses. Ammunition dwindled. Casualties mounted. They were alone, too far from any quick reaction force. Radio calls screamed through static. No support inbound. But then, impossibly, rotor blades. A skimming the ridge, braving fire to reach them. A combat search and rescue team dropping in where no sane pilot would. And there she was. He remembered her face for a moment, bent over his shattered leg. Her voice calm as she designated him Priority 1. Her hands moving with ruthless efficiency, even as enemy rounds cracked around them. When they went down 2 miles from the site, her leg torn open by shrapnel, she hadn't stopped. She'd organized survivors, carried and another wounded through 4 miles of hostile ground. 4 miles, with her own femur shattered. Had survived, but he'd never known her name until now. Back on the course, Freya moved alone. Mercer evacuated, limping far behind, the others fatting in the storm. She climbed the last switchbacks, her limp heavier with each step. Blood soaked through the bandage, dripping into the mud. Her breath came ragged, but her pace never broke. One step, another. At mile 70, she was the only one left in motion. Captain stood at the finish line, binoculars raised, instructors gathered around him. They weren't expecting arrivals for hours, and yet a single figure emerged from the tree line, small, steady, relentless. "Is that?" one instructor whispered. His jaw clenched, his voice low. "It's her." Freya's boots struck the final stretch. No fanfare, no celebration, just steady rhythm. She crossed the line at 63 hours, 5 hours faster than anyone in history. She set her rucksack down methodically, her voice hoarse but calm. "Is anyone else finished yet, sir?" Shook his head. "No, Sergeant, you're the first, the only one." And for the first time, silence fell not from mockery but from awe. Because the woman they'd all doubted, the one they laughed at, had outlasted them all. How do you carry others when you can barely stand yourself? The mountains of Afghanistan burned orange as the sun fell. Dust rose with every gust of wind, choking the small outpost at Firebase. A scattering of barriers, weathered tents, and a half-built command shack stood against the like toys waiting to be crushed. Freya remembered that day with cruel clarity. The way the air stank of cordite before the first round even hit. The way the silence before the ambush felt heavier than the storm that followed. It started with mortars. The first round slammed into their outer barrier, sending dirt and shrapnel raining down. Radios crackled, shouts overlapping. Then came the small arms fire, ferocious, disciplined, coordinated, not random potshots. This was an ambush designed to erase them. Specialist had been younger then, eager, a rifleman with too much optimism, still believing every firefight would end with helicopters swooping in to save the day. He remembered ducking behind sandbags as his leg exploded in pain, a bullet ripping through his femur. He remembered the blood, thick and hot, pooling in the dirt. They were outnumbered and too far from help. The radio screamed for support. The reply was silence. Until rotors. The unmistakable thump of blades cutting through chaos, appeared low over the ridge, diving into hell. Gunfire tore into its fuselage as it fought for a landing zone. Against every rule, against every calculation of risk, it came anyway. Freya was on board. She hit the ground, fast-roping, compact frame moving with precision. Dust exploded around her boots as she unhooked, weapon raised, eyes already scanning the battlefield. There was no hesitation, no moment of awe. She was already working, triaging, directing, pulling men who could no longer walk. Her voice cut through the panic, calm, commanding. "You apply pressure, you cover that sector, move him now." When she reached blood pooling from his leg, her hands didn't shake. She knelt, checked the wound, and spoke steady. "Femur fracture, priority 1." He remembered the strange calm in her tone, as if she'd done this 100 times. The sound of gunfire didn't make her flinch. She bound his leg, tagged him, and kept moving, dragging another casualty toward the waiting helicopter. She carried more weight than her frame should have allowed. For 15 minutes, chaos turned into something almost manageable. The wounded loaded, suppressive fire buying seconds, and then the scream of metal tearing. A rocket slammed into the tail. The aircraft spun violently, tail rotor gone. Freya shoved 2 soldiers inside just as the helicopter lifted off unsteadily, wounded but trying. The bird clawed skyward, twisting, lurching, was on board, drifting in and out of consciousness, the world tilting. He remembered the sound of her voice above the chaos. "Hold on." The crash came miles away. A violent spin, earth rushing up. The impact shattered everything, metal, bone, hope. Woke in the wreckage, The pilot was dead, the co-pilot clinging to life. Smoke curled from twisted steel, and Freya was alive, though barely. A jagged shard of rotor blade had torn into her thigh. Blood poured freely, her face pale but her eyes sharp, calculating. She tightened a tourniquet on her own leg with a grimace that never turned into a scream. Then she moved. She organized survivors, secured the perimeter, administered morphine to the worst cases. She pulled ammunition from the wreck, handing out rifles like lifelines, all while limping on a leg that should have ended her career in that moment. When the sun dropped, the enemy closed in, shadows on the muzzles flashing, bullets cracking the wreckage. Delirious with pain, remembered her silhouette in the firelight, small, defiant, weapon raised, fighting when no one should have been able to. But she knew the truth. They couldn't stay. The wreck was a coffin waiting to be sealed. So she made a choice no one else would have dared. She shouldered his leg useless, his body dead weight. She dragged another wounded beside him, one arm around her neck, and she started walking. 4 miles, through hostile terrain, bleeding with every step. Each pace was agony. Her shattered femur ground against itself beneath the makeshift brace, but she never let go. She stopped only to stabilize wounds, to force water into mouths, to listen for patrols. When she stumbled, she forced herself upright. When she faltered, she kept moving. Remembered her words in fragments, short, clipped, commands to stay alive. Breathe. Stay awake. Not here, we're not dying here. The night blurred into survival, gunfire at their backs, mud sucking at their boots, and always her limp, uneven but unrelenting, dragging them closer to safety. When they finally staggered into a friendly position, dawn was breaking. Freya collapsed last. She carried them home. The debrief that followed was cold, the mission classified, her name buried, never saw her again. Until now. Back in the present, the revelation crashed into him like the explosion had years ago. He stared at her on the trail, her scars exposed, her limp more pronounced than ever. It was her, the woman who had carried him through hell. The finish line came hours later, but she was already ahead. Mercer was gone. Stevens faltered miles behind, barely clung to the trail. And Freya walked into the clearing alone. The banner marking 72 miles fluttered faintly in the wind. Captain and the instructors waited, disbelief etched into their faces. She didn't stumble, didn't collapse, didn't cry out in triumph. She just crossed the line, stopped, and methodically removed her rucksack. 63 hours, said quietly, checking his watch. Record 68, she broke it. The instructors stared. No one clapped, no one laughed, no one knew what to do. Freya looked at her, face pale but steady. Anyone else finished, sir? He shook his head slowly. No, Sergeant, you're the first, the only one. She nodded once, took a canteen from a medic and began hydrating calmly, as if it were just another march. But new. He approached her, voice low, filled with something heavier than words. You carried me out, Firebase, that was you. Freya's eyes flickered, but her tone was flat, classified. I never knew your name, whispered, his voice cracked. They wouldn't tell us all these years. Freya didn't soften. I wasn't struggling, she said. I was packing. The truth struck him hard. She hadn't been limping behind. She had been moving exactly as she intended, conserving energy, calculating every step. While others wasted themselves, she endured. Her limp wasn't weakness. It was proof she understood pain better than anyone else on that trail. And that was why she finished first. Later, under the fatting storm, 4 more candidates stumbled across the line, exhausted, broken, but alive. Arrived third. His eyes met hers, shame in his silence. The man who had mocked her limp now bowed his head. She said nothing. She didn't need to. For the first time in 3 weeks, silence meant respect. Why did silence fall when she walked across the parade ground? A week had passed since the march, but its shadow lingered. The mud was gone, the rain had cleared, yet every survivor carried it inside their bones. They walked slower, spoke softer, ate with the caution of men and women who had learned hunger too well. Of the original 58 candidates, only 8 remained. 8 stood at rigid attention in pressed dress uniforms, boots polished, ribbons straight. 8 out of 58. And among them, Sergeant Freya. Her limp was still there, though softened by the crisp cadence of the ceremony. No one mocked it now. No one whispered. The limp had become something untouchable, like a scar on a battle standard, visible, undeniable, but by endurance. Captain stood at the podium. His voice carried over the formation, gravelly but deliberate, as if every word had weight. Selection is not about strength. It is not about speed. It is about will. What we ask of you breaks most. What remains we forge. His gaze moved over the 8 finishers. Then it stopped. 3 years ago, he began, one of these soldiers was told she would never walk normally again, that her career was finished, that she had reached her end. A murmur rolled through the small audience. Officials, instructors, a few families gathered to witness. She didn't accept that. He paused, letting silence settle. His hand rested on a file marked classified. During a rescue mission at Firebase, Sergeant Freya sustained catastrophic injuries, injuries that should have ended her career. Instead, despite her own wounds, she evacuated multiple casualties through 4 miles of hostile terrain. Her actions saved lives. For that, she was awarded the Silver Star. But due to the classified nature of the operation, it was never publicly presented. Until now. The audience stilled. Lifted the citation, his voice steady as he read the words aloud. Words that had once been locked away behind redactions and seals. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of her own life, above and beyond the call of duty. The story spilled into the open, the helicopter downed, the wounded carried, the impossible march through fire and blood. When he finished, looked directly at her. "Sergeant, step forward." Freya obeyed, her steps even, though the limp pulled at the silence like gravity. She stopped before him, eyes fixed forward. Drew himself to attention. Then slowly, deliberately, he raised his hand in salute. And one by one, every instructor followed, who had dismissed her from the first day, who now knew what she had carried. The entire cadre stood in salute, not because they had to, but because something greater demanded it. Freya returned the salute with crisp precision. No smile, no swelling pride, just duty. For the first time, the silence that followed wasn't filled with doubt. It was filled with reverence. After the ceremony, the finishers dispersed. Families embraced their soldiers. Laughter and relief softened the edges of weeks of suffering. Lingered, the same man who had once bet she wouldn't survive a single day. His hands fidgeted at his sides, unsure of how to approach. When he finally stepped forward, his voice was low, stripped of its swagger. "I owe you an apology," he said. His eyes didn't meet hers. "I judged you, mocked you, without knowing." Freya studied him for a moment. Then she spoke, even and unflinching. "You judged me exactly as I expected. The difference is, I didn't need your approval then, and I don't need your apology now." The words hit like steel, but then softer. "Still, I accept it, learn from it." Not at once, shame replaced by something more genuine. "I will." Later approached. He didn't come alone. His wife walked beside him, 2 children at their side. The younger one clutched a small flag, staring openly at Freya's leg, not with disgust, not with mockery, with curiosity and something like awe, though he didn't understand why. His voice was rough when he spoke. "This is the woman I told you about, the one who carried me home when I couldn't walk." His wife's eyes filled before she even stepped forward. She embraced Freya tightly, whispering, "Thank you, we owe you everything." Freya stiffened at the embrace, unused to it. Then, after a beat, she returned it briefly, quietly. "You would have done the same," she said. But they all knew the truth. Most wouldn't have. That night Freya sat alone in her barracks. The others celebrated. She didn't join. Instead, she opened the small waterproof pouch from her rucksack, the photograph she had carried like a talisman. Her and another soldier, dust in the air, a desert sky overhead, the other face hidden by shadow indistinct. She traced the edge of the photo with her thumb, her jaw tightening. Then she tucked it away. There was no closure in metals, no healing in recognition. What kept her moving wasn't what others saw, it was what she couldn't forget. 3 months later, the whir of rotors filled the air again. Freya climbed into a helicopter with her new team, specialized search and rescue operators, each in their own way. 8 who had survived selection, now forged into something greater. No one mocked her limp, no one doubted. Every scar on that bird was a credential. Her pack sat heavy at her side, her rifle secure, her helmet newly stenciled with a call sign, "Last One." The nickname no longer a mockery, no longer cruel. It was respect, a recognition that when everyone else fell, she remained standing. The helicopter banked toward the mountains, carrying them toward a mission yet unnamed. Freya stared out at the horizon, her face unreadable, her body steady. Because for her, it had never been about proving them wrong. It had always been about proving to herself that she could still carry others when the world told her she couldn't carry herself. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the helicopter fly so low, skimming the ridge like a shadow trying not to be seen? The mountains stretched endless beneath them, jagged teeth of rock and snow biting into the horizon. Freya sat in the belly of the bird, her rucksack pressed against her side, rifle resting across her lap. The others, 7 graduates of the crucible, rode beside her in silence, their faces taut with focus. First deployment together. First time stepping into the unknown as a team. Rotor wash whipped at their helmets. The red light bathed them in an eerie glow. They didn't need to speak. The mission briefings had already burned the plan into their minds. A downed surveillance drone, hostile territory, intel suggesting militia presence in the valley. Their job, retrieve the data core before enemy forces scavenged it. A simple objective on paper, but paper never bled. Freya's eyes traced the interior of the helicopter, the vibrations rattling against her chest. Across from her adjusted the straps of his kit. His eyes met hers briefly. No arrogance now, just acknowledgement, respect born of hardship shared. The pilot's voice crackled in their headsets, 2 minutes out. The bird dipped, banking sharply around a ridge. The valley opened beneath them, dark and narrow. A river cut through it like a scar, glinting silver in the moonlight. Freya flexed her left leg. Scar tissue pulled tight under the brace, pain flaring sharp, familiar. She breathed through it. Pain wasn't an enemy, it was a reminder. 30 seconds. The red light shifted to green. They moved. Boots slammed into dirt. The helicopter peeled away, rotors fatting until only silence and the hiss of the wind through the trees remained. Captain wasn't here. This wasn't selection anymore. This was real. Took point, broad shoulders cutting through brush. Covered left flank. Stevens scanned rear. No longer instructor but teammate now, kept steady eyes on their compass bearing. And Freya, she carried the radio, the heaviest piece of equipment once again. No one questioned it this time. The valley was quiet, too quiet. They found the wreckage within the hour. The drone's remains smoldered faintly, its fuselage torn apart across the slope. Freya crouched, scanning for tripwires. None. She approached, her hands steady as she the blackened casing free. Inside, the data core glinted dull and unassuming. Just metal, just circuitry, but worth lives. Package secured, she whispered into the mic. Then movement. Froze, fist raised. Shadows flickered against the tree line. The sound of boots, the metallic click of rifles. Contact right. Gunfire erupted. The night shattered. Muzzles flashed, illuminating faces twisted in fury. Rounds snapped overhead, thudded into dirt, ricocheted off stone. The team hit the ground, returning fire in disciplined bursts. Freya pressed against a boulder, her radio clutched tight against her chest. The limp slowed her movement, made cover harder to reach, but she adapted, always adapting. She sighted her rifle, breath steady, and fired. One round, another. She didn't need speed. She needed precision. Shouted, "We're pinned." Rounds tore bark from trees inches above his head. Stevens grunted, clutching his arm as blood seeped between his fingers. Freya's mind raced. Terrain, angles, options. She spotted a narrow draw cutting behind the enemy's position, exposed, steep but passable. "Flank left," she said calmly, pointing. "Draw cuts behind them. I'll move with the radio, draw fire." "No," snapped. "You'll never outrun them with that leg." But Freya was already moving. She didn't sprint. She didn't need to. She moved steady, deliberate, the way she always had. Her silhouette drew fire immediately, rounds cracking against stone around her. Sparks flew as bullets pinged off metal fragments of the wreck. Her teammates surged into the draw and flanked wide, disappearing into shadow. Gunfire intensified. The enemy shifted, attention fixed on the limping figure they thought was easy prey. Freya dropped low, mud splashing across her face. Her pulse pounded, but her breathing stayed controlled. She fired 2 more rounds, just enough to keep heads down, just enough to make them believe she was cornered. Then silence shattered into chaos. Steam erupted from the flank, rifles roaring. The enemy never saw it coming. Within minutes, the firefight was over. Bodies lay scattered. The valley returned to silence, broken only by the ragged breaths of the survivors. Crouched beside her, gripping her shoulder, "You good?" Freya nodded once. Pain radiated up her leg, fire licking through scar tissue, but her face betrayed nothing. Exhaled, shaking his head, "You drew them like bait." Freya wiped mud from her cheek. "I adapted." It wasn't pride, it wasn't bravado, it was simple truth. They secured the site, retrieved the core, and called extraction. By dawn, the helicopter lifted them out, blades cutting through pale morning light. Back at the forward operating base, the team sat in the mess hall, steam rising from tin mugs of coffee. No one laughed. No one boasted. They just sat, quiet, letting the weight of the mission settle. Broke the silence first, his voice softer than Freya had ever heard it. "Back on selection, I thought you slowed us down." Freya didn't look up from her mug. "I did, by design." Nodded slowly. "You don't run fast, but you outlast everyone." Leaned back, a rare grin tugging at his mouth. "Hell, she outlasts bullets." The others chuckled weakly, not mockery, respect disguised as humor. Studied her for a long moment. "You didn't hesitate, you never do." Freya sipped her coffee. "Hesitation costs lives." Her tone was matter of fact, but inside a flicker stirred, a memory of the crash, of dragging bodies through the dark, her own blood mixing with theirs. She set the mug down, steadying her hands. The scars still ached, they always would, but they weren't weakness. They were anchors, reminders of why she moved forward when others froze. 2 nights later, she sat alone on the roof of the barracks, the desert wind cold against her face. Below, the base hummed with generators, distant voices, the faint smell of diesel and dust. She pulled the photo from her pouch, the same one she always carried. She stared at the shadowed face beside hers, the soldier who never made it back. Her jaw tightened. She folded the photo carefully, returned it to its pouch, and looked out at the endless dark horizon. Her leg throbbed, her body ached, but her eyes remained steady. Because she knew this truth, scars don't define you by what they took. They define you by what you carried despite them. At dawn, her team assembled again, packs strapped, rifles ready, another mission briefed, another valley waiting. No one questioned her anymore. No one laughed at her limp. Because in the silence of the crucible and the fire of combat, she had shown them what it meant to endure. And endurance, more than speed or strength, was what kept soldiers alive. Why did the call for help come at midnight, when the desert was darkest and quietest? The radio crackled to life just past 100 hours. Static first, then a voice, strained and clipped. Mayday, mayday, this is Raven 27. Bird down, repeat, bird down, taking fire. Request immediate. The transmission cut off. Silence. Every soldier in the operations tent froze. The room filled with the low hum of machines and the sharp scent of stale coffee. Captain, posted temporarily with the detachment, leaned over the map table, his jaw hard. He didn't hesitate. Gear up, we're wheels up in 10. Freya's team moved fast. There was no chatter, no wasted motion. Every strap buckled, every rifle checked, every pack cinched tight. They had trained for this. They had lived through pieces of this. But the look in Freya's eyes was different. For her, this wasn't just another mission. It was. The helicopter thudded to life, blades slicing the night sky as they lifted into the dark. No stars, no moon, just a stretch of desert swallowing everything. Inside, the team sat tight against the rattling walls. Muttered a prayer under his breath. Checked his magazine 3 times in 30 seconds. Sat across from Freya, watching her carefully. He recognized that faraway look in her eyes, the way her jaw clenched with memory. He leaned closer, his voice low through the headset. You with us? Freya blinked once, pulled herself back. I'm here. But inside, she was already hearing echoes of rotor blades crashing, flames licking steel, screams swallowed by dust. The crash site came into view 30 minutes later. A faint glow of fire marked the wreckage against the desert floor. Smoke rose like a signal flare, visible for miles. Too visible. Enemy presence confirmed, the pilot warned. Multiple heat signatures moving on the site. They fast-roped down into chaos. Flames painted the sand in violent orange. The helicopter wreck lay broken, tail section twisted, rotor blades jutting like shattered bones. 2 survivors crouched behind the debris, rifles clutched in shaking hands. Their relief when the rescue team appeared was almost physical. Parachuted us right into hell, one muttered, his face streaked with soot. No time for greetings. Gunfire erupted from the muzzle, flashes lit the dark. The enemy was closing fast. Contact front, barked, dropping to a knee and returning fire. The team formed a perimeter, controlled bursts cutting into the night. Freya dragged the wounded crewman behind cover, her limp more pronounced with every step. One pilot clutched his ribs, blood seeping between his fingers. The other had a broken arm twisted at an unnatural angle. Stabilize and move, she ordered, her voice clipped calm. She tightened a tourniquet, shoved a morphine injector into trembling hands and looked up the ridge. More shadows moving, too many. Captain, we need now, called into the radio. Static answered, then silence. The enemy was jamming comms. For a moment Freya's chest tightened. It was all too familiar, the broken bird, the outnumbered survivors, the encroaching shadows. Firebase replayed in her skull like a cruel film strip. She could smell the smoke, feel the heat, taste the metallic tang of her own blood. Her hands trembled once, just once. Then she forced the memory down, burying it beneath cold discipline. This site's a death trap, she said. We move. Move where? Snapped, firing another burst. We've got enemy all sides. Freya's eyes darted across the terrain. Rocks, gullies, sparse vegetation. A narrow wash cut through the desert floor about 200 meters east, concealed enough to shield movement. She calculated quickly, factoring distance, enemy fire, the pace of the wounded. There, she pointed, we break for the wash, we hold until extraction. Squinted at her, that's suicide. No, Freya said, loading another magazine with precise motions. Staying here is suicide. Something in her voice silenced further argument. The dash to the wash was chaos. They laid down suppressive fire, moving in bounds. Bullets kicked up sand around their boots, tracers streaked across the night. One crewman stumbled, nearly collapsing. Freya slung his arm over her shoulder, dragging him forward, her legs screaming in protest. Her pace faltered. Her body begged her to drop the weight, but she didn't let go. They reached the wash, sliding into the dry gully, breath ragged, hearts hammering. The enemy fire slackened, momentarily confused by their sudden shift. "Ammo check," gasped. "Half a mag. 2 left. Running low." Freya reloaded methodically, her movement steady despite the tremor in her thigh. Pain throbbed, but pain wasn't priority. Survival was. The enemy regrouped fast. Footsteps crunched against gravel, voices shouting in the distance. They were closing in. "Options?" asked, his voice tight. Silence hung heavy. The wash gave them cover, but not for long. Ammo dwindled, extraction uncertain. Freya stared at the wounded, at the exhaustion etched into every face around her. Then she looked at the terrain again. She saw what others, the angles, the choke points, the places where a small team could hold longer than they had any right to. Her voice cut through the dark. "We make them pay for every step. We hold until we hear rotors. That's the plan." Gave her a long look, recognition in his eyes. He remembered that same calm years ago when she had carried him through fire. No one argued. The firefight that followed was relentless. Shadows crept closer. Gunfire cracked, echoing off canyon walls. The team fought with grim efficiency, every round placed with purpose. Freya shifted position slowly, carefully, keeping the wounded shielded. Her brace dug into scar tissue, each step agony. At one point, a round tore past, grazing her shoulder. She barely flinched, firing back, her jaw locked. Minutes stretched into hours. The moon slid higher. Sweat mixed with dust and blood. Their ammunition dwindled to single magazines. Still, Freya's voice remained steady, guiding, grounding. "Short bursts, conserve ammo. Shift left, watch the ridge. Breathe, don't waste shots." Her calm became their anchor. At last, faint at first, came the thump of rotor blades. Hope surged. The sound grew louder, cutting through the chaos. A roared overhead, its side gunners spitting fire forcing the enemy back. "Smoke out," shouted, hurling a canister skyward. A plume of green lit the dark. The helicopter dipped, rotors clawing at the air. Ropes dropped. "Go," barked, shoving the wounded forward, and Stevens hauled them onto the lines. Freya held her position, rifle steady, covering the team as they climbed, shouted down at her, "Let's move." She shook her head once, "Last one." He froze. For a heartbeat it was Firebase again, her silhouette holding the line while others escaped. But this time she climbed. Grabbed her arm as she swung into the bird. The helicopter lifted, tracers snapping through the air beneath them. The desert shrank away. Inside, the team collapsed against the floor, gasping, bloodied, alive. Freya sat against the bulkhead, her rifle across her lap, chest heaving. Her hands were raw, her leg throbbed like fire. But her eyes were steady. Back at base, medics swarmed the wounded. The team staggered into debrief, faces hollow but defiant. Studied them silently, his gaze lingering on Freya. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Later found her alone, sitting outside under the desert stars, helmet at her side. He lowered himself beside her, wincing at the stiffness in his own leg. "You almost stayed behind," he said quietly. Freya didn't answer. "You can't keep carrying everyone," Freya murmured. "One day it'll kill you." Her jaw tightened. She kept her eyes on the horizon. "Better me than them." Exhaled, shaking his head. "You really don't know how to stop, do you?" Freya finally looked at him, her face unreadable. "I stopped once. I lived with it, never again." Her voice was flat, but underneath there was a tremor, a shadow of something heavier. Didn't press. He knew some scars weren't meant to be spoken of. Above them, the stars stretched endless. And below, the team slept, alive because she refused to let history repeat. Why did the silence between missions feel heavier than the battles themselves? The desert base buzzed with routine, boots scuffing over gravel, the metallic clank of weapons cleaned, the hum of diesel generators. But for Freya, silence was louder than all of it. The firefight in the wash replayed each time she closed her eyes, the weight of the crewmen leaning on her shoulder, the screams swallowed by gunfire, the thump of rotors that almost didn't come. The team was alive but not unscarred. Stevens nursed a fractured arm, carried a limp of his own after shrapnel tore his calf, had a line of stitches across his temple close enough to have been fatal. They joked less now, spoke less, sat together in silence, heads bent over steaming cups of coffee, the kind of quiet forged when survival outweighs words. But underneath it, a new weight pressed down, doubt. Not in her they had seen what she could do, but in themselves. It surfaced one night in the barracks. The team sat around a battered wooden table, a deck of cards between them, dealt lazily, his broad hands from the last fight, stared at his cards without really seeing them. Finally, he broke the silence. We can't keep surviving like this. Every mission's a coin toss. Next time, maybe we don't get lucky. Looked up sharply. It's not luck. We make it out because we adapt, because we don't quit. His eyes flicked to Freya, because some of us refuse to stop moving. But shook his head. That's the problem. We're leaning on her, on one person, and one day she's not going to be able to carry all of us. Freya set her cards down carefully, her face unreadable. You think I? That's not what I said. Voice was strained. You shouldn't have to. The room went quiet. The air thickened with words unsaid. Finally leaned back, exhaling. Doesn't matter. Orders come down, we move. That's how it works. Doesn't matter what it costs. Freya's eyes stayed on, steady, unblinking. He looked away first. The next mission came sooner than expected. A convoy ambushed in the mountains, survivors scattered, pinned in a ravine. Their job, extract. They moved out at dawn, packs heavy, nerves than rifle slings. The mountains loomed above, cliffs jagged, air thin. The ravine was a kill zone. Smoke drifted from burning vehicles, the sharp smell of fuel choking the air. Sporadic gunfire echoed, enemy fighters still patrolling the survivors huddled behind a disabled Humvee, firing blindly, running out of ammunition. The team moved fast, suppressing, advancing in disciplined bursts. Freya's radio crackled with the panicked voices of trapped soldiers. 2 casualties, ammo low, can't hold. Hold, we're coming, she answered, her voice even. The firefight was brutal. Echoes bounced off rock, making it impossible to judge enemy numbers. Bullets sparked against stone, snapping overhead. Dust choked their throats. Freya crawled forward under fire, reaching the trapped soldiers. One was unconscious, a head wound bleeding freely. The other clutched his rifle like a lifeline, hands trembling. You're safe now, she told him. Her voice carried the weight of certainty. But certainty cost time. And time ran out. A grenade arced overhead, bouncing once before rolling into the dirt beside them. The young soldier's eyes widened in horror. Freya didn't think. She shoved him down, dragging the unconscious one with her, shielding them both with her body as the explosion ripped the air. Heat, pressure, silence. When the dust cleared, her ears rang, her back burned. Pain lanced up her leg, sharper than anything since Firebase, but she stayed upright. She didn't let go of the soldiers she'd shielded. Her team stormed forward, neutralizing the enemy with precision and fury. By the time the smoke cleared, the ravine was theirs. Knelt beside her, his voice sharp with fear. You're hit. Freya shook her head once, superficial. But blood soaked her sleeve. Her limp was worse, each step a blade twisting deeper. He saw the tremor she couldn't hide. But he also saw the way she refused to let the rescued soldiers out of her grip until they were safe. Extraction was chaos. medics shouting, rotors pounding, dust storms swirling. The rescued soldiers loaded first, wide-eyed, still alive because she had put herself between them and death. As the helicopter lifted, leaned close, his voice low enough only she could hear. "You're going to kill yourself doing this." Freya stared out the open door, desert wind whipping her hair. "Better me than them." The words echoed the same ones she'd spoken to nights before, but now they tasted heavier. Back at base, the medics insisted on treating her wounds. Stitches, bandages, another reminder carved into skin already mapped by scars. When she emerged, the team waited outside, restless, unsettled. Spoke first, his tone raw. "You can't keep throwing yourself in front of everything. We can't depend on that." Freya's voice was quiet but iron beneath. "You already do." "No," he snapped, stepping closer. "We depend on each other. That's what a team is. If you keep carrying the weight alone, you'll break. And when you break, we all break." The words hung heavy. Freya didn't reply. She just walked past, her limp more pronounced, her silence cutting deeper than any argument. That night she sat on the barracks roof again. The stars above were sharp, unblinking, the same stars she had stared at years ago after dragging through fire. The photo lay in her hands once more. The shadowed face beside her stared back, silent, eternal. "You wouldn't have stopped either," she whispered. Her voice cracked on the words. She tucked the photo away, wiped her face once and looked out at the horizon. Her scars ached, her body protested, but none of it mattered. Because the truth she carried was cruel and simple. If someone had to bleed first, she would choose herself. Always. The next morning, Captain briefed them on the next mission. His eyes swept the team, then lingered on her. He knew the truth. He'd seen it in her file, in her march, in every step she took. But he said nothing. Because sometimes, the hardest thing to confront isn't the enemy in front of you. It's the weight of the people you refuse to let down. Why did the mountains seem so quiet before they burned? The mission was clear on paper. An Allied unit had gone dark in a remote village pressed against the Afghan border. Last contact suggested they were alive but surrounded, running out of ammunition. Freya's team was tasked with extraction. Move fast, move quiet, get them out. But paper doesn't sweat, paper doesn't bleed, paper doesn't carry weight. They flew in at dusk, rotors beating against the valley walls, shadows stretching long. The helicopter dropped them on a narrow plateau, then lifted away, rotors fatting into the distance. Silence swallowed the team. The village sat below, stone huts clustered like brittle teeth, smoke rising from chimneys already blackened by fire. The air tasted of dust and gunpowder. Freya adjusted her pack, the weight settling into her leg with familiar ache. She looked at her team, 7 shadows in the gathering dark. They nodded once, no words, then they moved. Contact came fast. A burst of gunfire cracked from the tracers slicing the dark. The team dropped, returning fire in tight bursts, suppressing as they advanced. The village exploded with chaos, enemy fighters spilling from doorways, shouting, rifles snapping. Led the push, his bulk moving like a shield. Flanked left, precise, controlled. Stayed close to Freya, his eyes flicking toward her with unspoken concern. They breached the first hut. Inside, 4 Allied soldiers crouched, gaunt and desperate, their rifles nearly dry. Relief washed over their faces when Freya's team stormed in. "You're late," one rasped, voice hoarse. Freya handed him a fresh magazine. "We came." The words steadied him more than the ammo did. But extraction was never simple. The enemy regrouped fast, pressing in from the ridges, cutting off the path back to the plateau. Radio chatter hissed with bad news. "LZ compromised, too hot for pickup." They were trapped. His voice came through faint, clipped. "You'll have to move north. Secondary LZ 4 clicks, hold if you can, out." 4 kilometers, across open ridges under fire with wounded. The kind of order that could break a team. But Freya didn't flinch. She shifted the heaviest wounded onto her shoulder, bracing him with her good leg. "We move, now." The team followed without hesitation. The march was hell. Gunfire dogged them from the muzzle flashes sparking like fireflies. They moved in bounds, covering each other, dragging the wounded. Every step was heavier than the last. Freya's limp grew worse, blood soaking through her brace. Cursed as rounds sparked against stone near his head. "We're not gonna make it like this." "Yes, we are," Freya said. Her voice was steady, even as her body trembled. "How?" he demanded. "Because we don't stop," she answered. It wasn't bravado, it was the only truth she knew. At the 3-kilometer mark they hit the choke point. A narrow ravine, walls steep and jagged, a perfect kill zone. The enemy waited. Machine guns opened up, cutting the path into a storm of dirt and fire. The team dove behind rocks pinned. Bullets shredded the air. The wounded cried out, clutching their ears against the thunder. Slammed his fist against the stone. "We can't push through that." Freya scanned the ridges, her breath slow despite the chaos. The path was suicide, unless someone drew fire, unless someone bought time. Her choice was immediate, instinctive, the same instinct that had carried her through Firebase. She turned to, "Take them through when I move." His eyes widened. "No, not again." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't a request." "Freya." She didn't wait for permission. She shifted her rifle, checked her last magazine, and broke cover. The world exploded. She moved into the open, her limp dragging behind her, every round a whip crack against the ground at her feet. Bullets sparked around her, slicing air, tearing earth. She fired back with precision, short bursts, deliberate. She wasn't trying to kill them all. She was trying to hold their eyes, to make herself the target. Her team surged through the ravine behind her, dragging the wounded, sprinting while enemy fire chewed at her silhouette. Shouted her name, but she didn't turn. Pain tore through her thigh as a round grazed deep. She staggered, fell to one knee, then forced herself up again. Step by step, forward, firing, reloading, firing again. Every ounce of her body screamed. Every nerve begged to collapse. But she remembered the words she had carried since the hospital. "You'll never run again. Your career's over." And she spat them out with every shot, defying them, proving them wrong. At last, rotors thundered overhead. The secondary LZ lit up with tracer fire from this. The team broke into the clearing, hauling the wounded onto the bird. "Where's?" shouted. Spun, scanning the ravine. A lone figure still stood in the open, firing, dragging herself forward on sheer will. "Last one," she muttered under her breath, the call sign painted on her helmet. "Always the last one." Sprinted back into the fire. He grabbed her arm, hauling her toward the waiting bird. She resisted for a heartbeat, still firing, still holding the line. "It's enough," he shouted. His eyes burned into hers. "You've done enough." For the first time, she let herself believe it. Together they staggered onto the helicopter as it lifted, rounds snapping past the open doors. The desert fell away beneath them. The enemy shrank to shadows. Inside, the team collapsed against the floor, battered, bleeding, alive. Freya lay against the bulkhead, chest heaving, legs soaked with blood. Leaned across from her, eyes wide, voice rough. "You're insane." She met his gaze evenly. "I endure." Shook his head, half a grin breaking through exhaustion. "You don't endure, you carry." No one disagreed. The debrief was short. The words were clinical. Mission accomplished, survivors extracted, hostile forces neutralized. But in the silence that followed, every man in that room knew the truth. They had walked out because one woman refused to let them fall. Later, as dawn broke over the base, the team gathered outside, the first rays of sun painting the desert gold. Freya stood slightly apart, her limp more pronounced than ever, her uniform stained with blood and dust. Stepped forward. He saluted not as an instructor, not as a teammate, but as a man whose life she had carried twice. The others followed. One by one, 7 soldiers saluted the woman who had outlasted them all. Freya returned it, her hand steady despite the tremor in her body. Then she turned toward the horizon, the rising sun glinting off her helmet. Because in the end, her story was never about proving them wrong. It was about proving that scars are not the end of strength, that dignity doesn't need applause, that true resilience isn't loud. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.